All right, we're going to start our 7th unit today. And over the past several months, it's all been kind of leading up to this, where we have to put together the different concepts that we've talked about. Not everything that we've talked about, but some of the major concepts, particularly the first part of the year when we were working with positive and negative numbers. So what we're going to be working with starting today is equations. First thing we're going to start on is solving simple equations. When you were in the 6th grade, you should have worked with one-step equations and possibly with two-step equations. So our topic for the day is solving simple equations, and this leads us into digits 8-1. So 8-1 will be your first digits assignment. So if you'll copy this. Now as you work through this, there are things I need you to copy down, so make sure you copy them down. So if you'll pause it as you need to and then start it. So some of you have a difficult time knowing that you need to copy down certain things if I don't highlight it. So let's take care of this right now. Solving simple equations. All right, essential question. How can I use inverse operations to solve simple equations? Now, pause the video and start it back. Give yourself time to write this question down, because I'm going to keep on going. So make sure you pause it as you need to. We're going to start with just solving simple equations. So yes, I do want you to have this down in your notes. And the first part, just like each unit, we usually have some terminology. So yes, I do want you to copy everything that you have right here. What is the addition property of equality? You will be doing a lot of things this unit that I have not had you do before, such as showing your work on majority of the stuff. Some of you have had a hard time showing your work. This unit you're going to have to. So what is the addition property of equality? The addition property of equality states that if you add the same number to each side of an equation, the two sides remain equal. Now, if you'll copy these down, then we'll expand on it a little later. Second one, what is the subtraction property of equality? So again, if you'll copy this down. The subtraction property of equality says if you subtract the same number from each side of the equation, the two sides remain equal. Just pardon the bell. The next property is what is the multiplication property of equality? The multiplication property of equality states that if you multiply each side of an equation by the same number, the two sides remain equal. Now, in the past, you've talked about the associative property, the distributive property, and the commutative property. Now that you're kind of getting into more algebraic concepts, you're going to have a lot more properties. In fact, when you get into algebra, you will probably talk about 10 to 15 new properties that you'll be responsible for. And the last one, what is the division property of equality? The division property of equality states if you divide each side of an equation by a non-zero number, that means some number other than 0, the two sides remain equal. And the reason we say a non-zero number is because you cannot divide a number by 0. We talked at the beginning of the year that represents something that is called undefined. So again, pause the video if you need to so you can copy everything down and then move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to get into actually solving the simple equations. And how do we solve a simple equation? So, again, if you'll copy the information down. How do I solve simple equations? To solve simple equations, we're going to use what are called inverse operations. We talked about the additive inverse a little earlier in the year. Inverse operations basically means opposite operations. Up, down, on, off, those are opposites. We talked about opposite numbers, 5, -5, 2, -2, opposite numbers. Now we're going to talk about inverse operations. What would be the opposite of addition? The opposite of addition is subtraction. Those are called inverse operations. The inverse or opposite of multiplication is division, and vice versa. So addition and subtraction are inverse operations, multiplication and division are inverse operations. So for instance, if I add 5 to something, how do I undo that? Or how do I do the opposite of it? The opposite would be to subtract it. Or if I divide something by 10, how do I undo it? How do I do the opposite of it? The opposite would be to multiply by 10. So solving equations has to do with what are called inverse operations, having to do the opposite, or how do you undo something. I'm going to use these words sporadically. I may use one time, I may use one and the other time. So we have inverse operations, we have the word undo, and we have the word opposite for opposite operations. Now, if you'll get these 3 terms down as well. So these 3 phrases, inverse operations, undo, and opposites, represent 2 different or 3 different words that mean the same thing in terms of solving equations. All right, first example we're going to go with. So again, yes, I do want you to copy this. So we're going to solve this equation. So our equation is 3 plus x equals 11. All right, as I go through this, we're going to use these operations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use specific words, specific terminology as I go through this. As we go through this, I'm also going to talk about the inverse operations. So in an equation, we're trying to solve for the variable. So we have in this equation, we have 3 plus x equals 11. 3 plus x equals 11 are inverse operations. Is our equation. It's called a one-step equation. A one-step equation is often called a simple equation. So I have 3 plus x equals 11. My goal is somewhere down here to solve for x. So your job is to fill in everything in there to get x. Now, what I want to do here is I want to solve for x. Now, if I look at this side of the equation, I have a 3 with x. I've got to get everything away from it. So what I want to do is I want to cancel out this 3. The way we're going to cancel it out is by using the inverse operations that we talked about. We're going to undo the problem. We're going to do the opposite. Remember, these 3 phrases mean the same thing. So the way I'm going to undo this problem, or undo that 3, is to get rid of it. If you have $3, you spend it. So I'm going to subtract 3. 3 minus 3 is 0, so that cancels out. When that cancels out, the only thing left over is that x. So I'm going to just bring it down. So I bring down that x if this will work correctly. Now, I talked to you earlier in the year about an equation being balanced. It's kind of like a seesaw. You do something on one side of the seesaw, put 100 pounds, you've got to put 100 pounds on the other side to balance it out. So this is our seesaw. This equation is our seesaw. So if I subtract one side by 3, I've got to balance it out by doing the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 3 there. So whatever I do mathematically on one side of the equation, I've got to do on the other side. So 11 minus 3 is 8. Now, this is a one-step equation, simple equation, because it takes one step. That one step was to subtract 3 from both sides. So this equation has an answer of x equals 8. Now, when you have an equation, what you can do is you can take your answer, substitute it back in, and you have a built-in way to make sure that you have the correct answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my answer, and I'm going to substitute it back in for x. So I'm going to put 8 in. Now, does 3 plus 8 equal 11? Yes, it does. So 11 equals 11, so I know I've done the correct process. Now, the next one I'm going to work a little bit different, and I'm going to have you add a couple things. So, as you're working right now, yes, I do want you to have these things copied down. All right, this next equation, we have b minus 2 equals negative 10. Now, I want you to go back now, and I want you to look at the different properties that we have. We have the additive addition property of equality, subtraction property, multiplication property, and division property of equality. We're going to use these properties to solve this equation, okay? So, what we have here is b minus 2. Our goal is to get b by itself. So we have a -2. So what we have to do is cancel this out. We want that to cancel out or get to 0. So think about a negative. We're going to use additive inverses. What is the opposite of a -2? It would be a +2. So we're going to use the addition property of equality. So what we're going to do, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. You'll just bear with me 1 minute. We've got b -2 equals 10. So we have a -2. That's subtraction, so we want to do the opposite. What's the opposite of subtraction? It's addition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 to both sides. If I add 2 to this side, I also have to add 2 to the other side. So what I just did is I applied the addition property. So we applied the addition property. What that is this property right here, the addition property of equality. So I've applied the addition property of equality. So while some of you are probably not copying this down, I do want you to copy everything that I have here. I'm not going to highlight everything, except I'm going to have it in these brackets so that you'll know to copy it down. So let me minimize this. Not minimize it, but make it smaller so that you can see everything. So the first thing I did was I applied the addition property of equality. I am going to copy this down because I am going to require you to copy this part down as you're showing your work. I do want you to show all this work here as you're working. So as I go through this now, I know I have adding 2 to both sides, or I'm adding 2 to both sides. So -2 plus 2, that's going to cancel out. So that gives you 0. That is what we want. We want it to go to 0. I don't need that 0, so I'm going to just ignore it for now. But I'm going to take this b and I'm going to bring it down. As you'll notice, I'm going to try to keep my equal sign lined up. I want you to try to do the same thing to keep it more organized. Now right here, I have -10 plus 2. -10 plus 2 is -8. You should know that because we've talked about positive and negative numbers. You're adding or subtracting with different signs. So the rule is you subtract, take the sign of the bigger number. So I subtract to get an 8, take the sign of the bigger number, and I get a -8. So what I can do now is I can take my original equation, substitute my answer in. So I have -8 for b minus 2. Does that equal -10? So the way I can check my work, -8 minus 2, they have the same sign, so I'm going to add them. 8 and 2 give you 10. Keep the sign since they're the same, and that gives you -10. So does -10 equal -10? Yes. So I know I have the right answer. We're going to stop this video right here, and we're going to call this video 1, and then you will move on to video 2.